Okay. So the thing I need to do is share my screen, and I will need feedback from you folks to make sure that you're actually seeing it. So if I can get some thumbs up or something cool like that, and you're actually seeing the presentation. Wow. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about this book and academic advising model for the 21st century is the major focus of what I'm bringing, which is chapter 1. But I just wanted to start with, will my presentation let me move forward? Okay, so why this book? I do want to talk about that specifically. I did find a gem in the foreword that I couldn't let pass. We have to talk about it because it's one of my favorite authors and scholars regarding the work of academic advising and persistence. I also saw in the preface that O'Banion wrote a really neat experiment that he tried that I think is worth talking about. And then, of course, the actual chapter itself, which I know because you're all good college students. You did the reading beforehand, so I don't really need to go word by word through this chapter because you're already caught up. All right, so why this book and how does it relate to EIU? Um, while it is about community colleges, the work in this book really arises from, there was a period in the late 60s, early 70s where folks were looking at factors of retention and persistence. What keeps students in college? They hadn't quite yet made the link to calling that student success. It was literally like, what keeps them coming back? And a couple of scholars, you've heard about Tinto and Aston and folks like that, but along the way, a couple of scholars started noticing, one consistent relationship that students have is with their academic advisor. And then the more they pondered that, they start to think, what if what happens in advising matters, right? Like it's not just an administrative function, but what if it actually has an impact on the student? And so that's kind of where it started getting a connection of, we really ought to look at this advising thing closely. And two real classic models emerged about the same time. And the first one is the developmental view of academic advising as teaching, which came from Crookston. And, I remind you, prior to that, academic advisement was really about handing someone a checklist or an undergraduate catalog and saying, here, follow this program of study. It was very prescriptive. It was designed to get you from point A to point B as quickly as possible. And anyone who was not following that prescribed path was kind of out of bounds, right? They're kind of off track. They're kind of not doing the right thing. And there's not really any consideration for the individual needs. Now, when I say that, I mean generically. We all know that there's always going to be someone who's a champion of the student. There's someone who's paying attention. My student has to work, or my student has a family. But in general, the idea of advisement was just to make sure you're taking the right courses. And that was kind of the end of it. So when Crookston came out with his model, that was a big deal to think of, like, we have an opportunity to teach our students, to develop them, to tell them about skills that help them be successful. So that was a big deal. And then our author, or our editor of this book, Terry O'Banion, designed his model about academic advising. And it's more of a procedural, almost like a checklist kind of thing, as you saw in chapter 1. But it still mattered because it was establishing tent poles, right? Like, we've got certain things that as academic advisors, we should be making sure that we're doing with students. And when you look into kind of the content that O'Banion laid out, there are developmental aspects, and there's definitely more of a relational approach there than just, here's my checklist, follow that checklist. If we want to connect it to our current practice, I have a couple of things to talk about. So first of all, when O'Banion was authoring this book, it was the 40th anniversary of the model that he first published. And by the time we're talking about it today, it's now been 50 years. And while we've seen new advising models emerge, you think about appreciative advising, intrusive advising, or proactive advising, it can be called. There's been some big breakthroughs in that, but we are still kind of following the same two models. We're saying there's certain things that any good advising program will try to attempt, and we know that it is an opportunity to teach, to help students learn. So that part has kind of remained the same. But in this particular edition, O'Banion kind of fleshes out some more about the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that the academic advisor should possess. And I think that is a really interesting point of conversation that we could have when we pause after the segment on the experiment and the forward. And then finally, I have to mention our own changing demographics right now, post-pandemic. The buzzwords you all keep hearing me say are learning loss and social skill degradation. And we have all had some conversations about how that is impacting our students and changing the kinds of supports that they need. So I do want to pause here and see if there's any commentary from those of you who are super achievers, cough, Sam, cough, who have read the entire book and may want to just offer something about connecting this to our practice or kind of O'Banion's place in advising history.
I'm overachieving in the moment. I'm a procrastinator when assigned things. So I have read chapter 1.
I just wanted to comment that I was really intrigued by some of the things in chapter 1, because here at EIU, in terms of decisions about who the faculty advisors are once a student reaches the department, have historically been driven by the language in the contract more than anything else. And in fact, I wonder that contract language changed substantially with the last contract. Who knows what we don't know what we're going to see with the one that's currently under negotiation. But historically, for like 20 years, and this popped into my head when I was rereading the chapter this morning, because he specifically talks about if you have an inexperienced person, having them do only 15 advisees. Well, under the old contract, faculty who advised didn't get paid for the first 19 advisees at all. And so a lot of departments use that as a cost-saving, faculty load-saving measure, but it also then meant that you often had faculty who really didn't want to be advisors, but had it assigned to them because it helped manage the department budget. So I'm really interested to explore more this kind of idea about who's really well suited to be an advisor and what skills do they need.
Oh, Dr. Dietz, you're going to get me on my soapbox. You all have heard me talk about this. I despise the way higher ed, determine which faculty will perform advising. And it's neat to see that O'Banion was wrestling with this in the early 1960s, and we'll definitely get to that section. But we often see it's, well, you're the new faculty member, so this is your hazing ritual, or you're the faculty member who actually cares and tries to do a good job, so it's your punishment for doing a good job. And then when you have contractual things like Julie just described, it's not, I don't want to say that chairs are inherently like they're not looking to be bad. They're working with limited resources, and they're trying to find every way they can to squeeze a penny out. And so if the magic number where I got to start paying you is 19, well, guess what? Everybody gets 18, right? And so it gets really tough. So I do thank you for that comment. Before we move on to my gem in the forward, is there any other commentary on just why we would read this book or where O'Banion fits?
I thought a couple key statements that I highlighted that I think we need to continue to remember, even with managing all the fallouts of COVID or whatever, is a statement on page 11 was the student is responsible for decision making throughout the process. And I think that is so key that we tout that from day one while they're trying to decide what's important in their lives, especially with this generation, in how their career goal is going to fit into what's important in their lives, which is really important in this generation. And then he went a step further on page 13, saying that course scheduling and course choice basically is a waste of time for the experts in the career choice area to be spending their time on, because that's more of a mentoring situation. And where are you going with all this? And it's so funny to me that people who haven't advised thinks that's what advising is all about, is just picking your schedule and picking your classes. And people who do advise are like, I could do that part in my sleep. My challenges are the vocational exploration and the life decision exploration. So the fact that he was connecting that back in the 70s and we're still fighting that battle of educating others in that was very interesting, scary, and reassuring all at the same time.
Very good. Well said, Sam. I appreciate that. All right, well, let's take a look ahead. Let's see what else I can tell you about here. As I promised, there was something in the forward that, oh, wait, our scenery changed. I stopped using whatever PowerPoint gave me and I started pulling scenes from around Illinois. Beautiful Illinois, get out and explore. So there was something in the forward I could not let pass. And that was Tinto's 4 critical conditions that promote student success. And so let's look at those. Tinto said expectations, right? We're going to outline expectations for students. This is what it means to be a college student. This is how you do this. But also support. It's okay that you don't know how to do that. We're going to show you how. It's okay that all throughout high school, no one ever mentioned the discipline of anthropology, and now you're taking it in college and learning about it all brand new for the first time. We're going to provide support for anthropology. And I make my note here, the asterisks are to remind us that Sanford's theory of challenge and support actually came out around the same time that O'Banion is wrestling with this. And there's a couple of pieces I would like to reflect on there. Yes, O'Banion started his work as dean in 1960. That means he was an educational leader during the time of desegregation, right? There were some huge social changes. And I'm sure that no one in this meeting was old enough to remember that clearly, but let's just say that it was a big deal, right? And it made us change the way we were looking at students. And we are at that same point now where we're all tired of talking about the pandemic, but it is that big cultural thing that is shaping the next generation of students and forces us to have some conversation. So there's 2 of them, expectations and support. And then we get into assessment and feedback. Tinto says it's really important. You got to assess and find out if what you're doing is having an impact. And you'll see O'Banion say some interesting things about student satisfaction in a moment, but definitely got to have that feedback, got to have some assessment to see, am I pulling the right levers? Does this new thing we tried work? Can we take it to bigger scale? And then involvement, and this is really where you get into Aston and Tinto a lot also, is just this idea of if the student feels like they have some ownership of campus, there's something there that's theirs, right? Whether it's the rec center, whether it's a club they're a part of, whether it is going to Panther athletics and, heckling the opposing team, they need something that they feel like that is my space. And I want to come back to that. I don't want to leave that until I've finished what I came here to start. So all of those things really build up to be critical for student success. And that is my second pause point. What do you folks think about Tinto and about these 4 critical conditions?
I'll say a little something. Again, Tinto was probably all through my dissertation because you all know that I looked at, retention and involvement for our first gen ethnic minority students. And I mean, all of them hit the point. Okay, I'm in the residence hall today. Today is my Tuesday, Thursday, so I'm trying to get my students. I apologize. But I think he's on point. I think one of the things as an institution, we probably lack a little bit of is just the assessment and the feedback, but something I think, you know, we are gonna look at, you know, to literally see what they do. And then, of course, when I get ready to discuss, you know, what is it that the students feel about advisement? But I do think that these are on point and all four of them. And just to reiterate what Sam said is, you know, that's the big part of the advisement session, right? Trying to find out what they know, what they don't know, who they like, who they don't like, and then of course selecting the classes. And you know, gaining that rapport is so important. So I do think that he was on point with this these conditions that he had.
So on that topic of assessment, you know, I see folks in here from education and business and liberal arts and sciences, athletics, faculty are here. What methods do you currently use? How do you know if your advisement is helping students? And how do you gauge student satisfaction? What are we doing out there on campus?
I request a T-val, just like our instructors do, at the end of every year. I think most of the professional advisors do that for their portfolios. And then for my specific position, I'm looking at acceptance rates. And I tell people all the time that our acceptance rate is not a reflection of me. It's a reflection that Eastern has this position to help students navigate and make an informed decision whether they should be applying and if they're ready to apply and if they're really all about what they've said they were going to do, or if that's something they need to step away from. And so my position is lucky in the fact that we have that, but I think a lot of our positions we have professional tests, whether it's licensure or boards or whatever that students have to pass. And I think that can also be a reflection of our success, not just classroom success.
I would be curious to know, because one of the things, you know, as I prepare for chapter 2 in the book, I contacted Carrie to see what areas, especially in advisement, do we do assessment. And I know even in academic advising, we just started assessing semester by semester. We usually, they could use the evaluations in their portfolios, but that's after they have been released from academic advising, which to me, it just didn't serve a purpose. And so we started, you know, not just for, you know, to see how you're doing, but just to see how the students experience. And it's just like what you said, this isn't an evaluation of if they don't like you, you know, you get a bad evaluation. It's about if they don't like you, what was it that we missed that they wanted from us? And so I was curious because there weren't all of the departments that are doing assessment on advisement. So I'm not sure if they're doing it on their own, but I know in testing and evaluation, I know Sam was mentioned, and I think one area in, I think education, and I'm not sure with HHS if they're doing it anymore, but I know originally Carrie used to do it, but I don't know if there's something that's being done now.
I was going to add that in athletics, we do a senior exit interview. And part of that overall interview is, a small part of it is the academic resources, both on campus and in athletics, which advising is somewhat a part of that. But we do it at the end of the 4th year. The NCAA there's a new, it's called the Transformation Committee, and they're looking at a lot of things. And one of the things on the docket is to look at doing a more, an evaluation each year of their experiences. So we'll be hearing from freshmen at the end of the year, sophomores, juniors, and part of that they'll also lump in the academic stuff. So, you know, we'll be hearing more frequently, you know, sooner than later at the end of their career, but all along. And then also what we do is we send that instrument out, but we also hold, we randomly select student athletes to come in and actually give more feedback during those exit interviews. So, we'll ask them, okay, what did you think about this? What did you think about that? And so it's a more in-depth interview, I should say, than the survey instrument that goes out to them. So that's kind of in our world, what we do.
Thank you for sharing that. I was certainly going to pick on you because I wondered. I know that you don't do the work of academic advisors, but you do critical work in connecting students to resources, holding them accountable. And just like Mona was saying, right, there are going to be days that your students don't like you because you're telling them something they don't want to hear. So that's not a negative reflection of you. Just like sometimes Greg has to tell a student, with your GPA so far, I don't think you have a very good chance of getting into the nursing program here at EIU. So let's talk about what that means for you. That person could give Greg a bad evaluation today, but when Greg and I are reviewing those, we're looking for, did they go away understanding what their options were and that they felt like they were getting to choose based on what is realistic for them. And so it's definitely neat. And just like Mona said, previously it was based on students who were going out to the department. It was kind of this idea of your advisement with us is complete. Let's get some feedback. But we did switch to every single semester, every advisee has an opportunity to give a voice. We went from 60 something responses a year ago to 600 and something this past December. So we were very pleased with the rate of feedback. And when you get an amount of feedback that is large, if you see a trend that says Danny is always running late to his advising appointment, then that's something you can actually take, with a smaller grain of salt, right? We still know people are going to get mad and go fill out whatever they want. But when you got 100 people saying something, it's a lot better than when you have 10 people. It really matters. All right, so let's try to get you some more stuff here. Let's take a look at the experiment that I caught in the preface that Abanion was doing. And he was playing around with differing advising personnel. It's really interesting. So in 1960, their advising model was faculty only. And they were using what at the time was pretty much the guide to academic advising had been published the year before, and it was about how faculty should advise. The next year, they said, wait, what if we only used faculty who actually wanted to do the work and would be willing to go through some training so that they are, we hope, prepared to do the work? Then the next year they said, okay, now no faculty, let's do all professional advisors and see how that goes. And the final year, they gave students a choice. You can advise yourself, air quotes, or pick the advisor of your choice. I'm going to guess among a list, right? You couldn't just go to anyone for anything, but here are all the advisors available for your program. You get to pick. And this is what I love, this next point. Abanion wrote that student satisfaction did not differ among any of the various models. So when we're looking purely at student satisfaction, they really didn't care who it was, whether it was a professional advisor, a faculty member, that they were taking care of themselves. It was kind of the same. And I wanted to pause right there to see how that made you feel and if you picked up on maybe something that Abanion didn't address. See, for everyone who thought you were just going to come and listen to Danny talk for 40 minutes, we're having participation.
Well, what struck me is why we still don't have an evaluation instrument for the academic advisor in my department. And I started advising in 2000, and then when Amanda took over, we still don't, because designing an instrument that actually assesses how effectively the advising has been done and whether or not the students were satisfied with their experience are two different animals. I mean, they're both valid and both important, but as department chair, I'm far more concerned about what percentage of our students complete their degree in 4 years, complete their degree in 5 years, what percentage of students you know, have problems because they were advised to take the wrong thing. Not that that ever happens with Amanda, you know, but I'm more interested in metrics that lead to an objective evaluation of the student's success here on campus, which does not necessarily correlate with whether or not they're enjoying the experience or happy with the experience. So, I mean, that was the first thing that struck me. It's like student satisfaction. What do you mean? Because student satisfaction and student success are not the same thing. Two equally interesting and equally important things to look at, but not the same thing.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for immediately pointing out that satisfaction and success are different measures. And as you said, equally valid. Everyone in this room is either a parent or has run a classroom before, and you know that you can get satisfaction by letting people do whatever they want. That doesn't mean that that's what's good for them, right? And so it was kind of interesting, and I think it really fueled O'Banion to look at, okay, so it doesn't necessarily matter who's delivering this. It's probably more important that the way it's being delivered and how it's being packaged. But are there other comments on this before I press on?
I'll speak up. Cindy actually let me take her spot last week to go to a conference at the NCAA offices. And Dr. Gary Green was the first speaker. And I think, Julie, you made a really good point. Like, satisfaction versus success is different. However, we are working with a completely different generation, and the way that they see success is a lot of time based in their personal satisfaction. And that if they are feeling satisfied, it will lead them to want to hit those markers of, you know, meeting these progress and graduating at this time and things like that. So I think it's, as time shifts and changes, and, you know, the COVID generation, as you said before, Danny, it's always going to be there, and it's wildly different. And I think that we are working with a generation of students right now that craves personal interaction, one-on-one, in-person interaction, and something that's clearly catered towards them specifically and not the collective group that they're in. So I think it's interesting, like you said, you know, I can give my 2-year-old all the candy and fruit snacks she wants, and she's gonna pay for it later. But, you know, I definitely think that this generation is satisfaction is going to play a bigger role than I think previous generations would have said.
I just put a link in the chat. It's an article that was in the Chronicle of Higher Ed yesterday. It's more talking about classroom instruction, but this generation of students of what their expectation is. And many times their expectations actually don't correlate with success or what they think they want. Especially in classroom operations, like if I said the deadline is this date, there was probably a reason for that. But it parallels what you're talking about. That was Jen, right? It parallels what you're talking about, that you have to establish a relationship with them, that they feel satisfied by the personal interaction, so that they're more willing to accept even the hard news sometimes that you're telling them. But on the other hand, they are of a generation that satisfaction means I'm getting what I want. And they've been allowed to have that in their education for the last 3 years.
Well, and I think that ties to something I highlighted in the opening comments, that aligning courses of study to workplace requirements. To me, that wasn't knowledge and content, that was accountability and expectations, which goes back to one of the pillars. And if we don't have that accountability in there and clear expectations, we're not developing them for the workforce in real life either.
This conversation also makes me think about those moments over the last few decades where we have transformed classrooms, right? When we first had that aha moment that Sage on the stage is not necessarily the best way for everyone to learn, that, you know, getting Danny in front of the camera and letting him tell you what the book says and what you should take from that is not always the best thing. We all had those moments along the way, every little thing, whether it was flipped classrooms, the introduction of multimedia, where we're like, I feel like I'm having to entertain children more and more, right? Like, and we might lament, but we are adapting and growing and understanding to meet students where they are. We can have personal opinions that like, oh, this is a soft generation or they don't have grit or whatever. But at the end of the day, if Dr. Dietz is measuring, I want to know how many people graduate on time, then she's got to figure out a way to help them graduate without compromising the rigor and integrity of her program, right? And if that means that we're doing different things in the classroom, then darn it, we're doing different things in the classroom. So it's very neat there. And we're knocking on the door of the next part of my presentation. So I want to go into that because I think we'll have a lot of commentary here. I want to say, let's get to the actual chapter. I've been leading up to this, but okay, so O'Banion revisits the model that he published in 72, and really the biggest contribution he makes, the biggest addition, is really trying to clearly identify what are the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that advisors should have, and maybe some of the context that he's given for each stage or each step in the process is a little fleshed out, but mostly it's just thinking about, okay, what does that mean about the person performing the advising? And again, he's already done all that research that, you know, it's limited study in one community college in Florida, but over the course of 4 years, he couldn't tell the difference regardless who was delivering the advising. So how do we make sure that the person delivering that advising has the best training and preparedness? So I've tried to adapt the table that O'Banion has in page 10 of the book, but you know, this first column, these are these steps or these stages that he says that we need to get through in our advising relationship with a student. And we all know that maybe you don't get through all 5 of them every single time, but they have to be part of the ongoing conversation. And it is exactly why, as Sam said earlier, right, like the course scheduling part, that's all the way at the end. And that's like the easiest part of the bunch, right? It's all the stuff before that. And so it starts with those life goals. So what are we doing here? We're trying to help the students articulate how they want to live their lives and how the college experience can feed into that, right? And just as Sam pointed out from page 13, the student is making the choice. We're definitely outlining possibilities. We're helping them be aware of their blind spots. We're making referrals. We're getting them to talk to faculty members and open up their eyes to things. But overall, we're just asking the student, what do you want to do with yourself? What do you want your life to be about? And how can our institution help you on that journey, right? And so look at some of the things that O'Banion says we need to know. We need to know about student development. And I think this is interesting because one of the things I love about academic advising is just the variety of backgrounds you get in it, right? You'll have people who are social scientists, who are liberal arts majors, who, you know, I've had a couple of advisors I've supervised in my career who were geology majors, and they were amazing. And so you have all this variety. And then the path to advising, even at an institution like EIU that says for its professional ASP advisors that you must have at least a master's degree, it doesn't necessarily say what that master's degree is in. So some people go get an MBA and then move to advising, or they pursue something in teaching. And just as like we all like to make our snide jokes, right, that PhDs who teach at college may have never been given any instruction on how to teach. With academic advisors, it is possible that you can come into advising without ever being told how to guide people through this developmental process, right? And so that's the challenge that we all face. Some places have much better support systems for a new advisor to say, we're going to teach you about this. You didn't have a student affairs background. We're going to teach you about student development theory to make sure that you have some basic understanding of that, so that, you know, when Danny throws out challenge and support, you have an idea of what he's talking about. So I thought that was interesting, because student development is not something that everyone has the privilege of having studied formally, and it's often a gap that we have to fill in. While my master's degree was in higher education administration, we didn't touch on that psychology side. The only developmental psychology class I had was in undergrad when I was on a teacher certification track. And so it was definitely a gap in my knowledge that I was fortunate enough to have advisors to fill that in. I remember sitting down with my supervisor in Washington State University athletics, and him going through Chickering and Reiser and the vectors of development with us. And that was something that, if that supervisor didn't spend that time on me, how am I going to find that? How do I even know that exists, right? So important that we have some student development knowledge. Decision processes is my truncated way to talk about. O'Banion says we got to know what's happening when people are making decisions. Like, what are those factors, those influences, and how does that play out to the person sitting at the table with us, and to think about what their motivations are and different approaches. You know, few of us have been lucky enough to take a motivational interviewing course and learn about the importance of making sure that we ask questions in an open-ended way that gets students to identify their values and their goals and then pursue that. So leading those kinds of discussions is not necessarily a natural talent for people. And then a knowledge of psychology and or sociology, right? Like, how do people, or how do groups of people think? And then O'Banion tells us we need some counseling skills. And this is one that I kind of wanted to definitely have some discussion on, because when he says counseling throughout the rest of his text, he's referring to advising. So it is not clear here to me whether O'Banion means actual counseling, or if he means interview techniques or conversation techniques that kind of allow those types of conversations and development to happen. And then on the attitude side, he says we've got to have this diversity mindset, that we've got to value different points of view. Somebody is going to come in and sit down across the table from me and say that they want to major in construction management. And that's something that I just don't have an interest in. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not my thing, right? Greg got a degree in history that was probably my least favorite subject all throughout college, not because it was hard, I just didn't like it, right? So those kinds of things happen. We've got people who won't pursue certain majors or plans of action because of their strongly held religious beliefs. All of those things are valid for that student, and we have to value that. And then, speaking of valuing, we have to value the students themselves, right? We have to believe that every student is worthy, that deserves our respect, that should have a chance to succeed, that we should give them our all. And we have to see potential in them. We have to see that this is a student who can make it, or they wouldn't be admitted. And we know that our admissions criteria are very carefully formulated based on historical performance, right? That this is kind of that magic line where you can get most of the people to graduate without making the club so exclusive that only a few people can get in, or without allowing everyone to get in and tanking our reputation. So it's a tightrope that they're walking in admissions and making those decisions. So the life goals, I'll go shorter on the others so that we can actually talk about it. Vocational goals. Here we're trying to get the student to tell us, how do you want to earn your living? How do you want to contribute or make a mark in society? And in addition to all of the knowledge that O'Banion says we have to have in step one, here he says, well, we got to know about the vocations, right? We don't have to know everything about every vocation, but we have to know that certain things exist that are never going to be on a student's radar. And we have to be ready to deal with stereotypes like all art history majors are living at home with their parents and things like that, right? That we have to be prepared for those kinds of conversations, and to have tangible examples of hey, art history majors actually get hired for a variety of jobs, many of them in leadership and management, because they have good creativity, good communication and expression. Like, we have to be able to talk about those things. We're on a skill level, we're going to have to be able to interpret some tests at this point to see, do your aptitudes align with your interests? And sometimes it's as simple as a placement test. Sometimes it is a career interest inventory, and we have now developed a whole profession in the last couple of decades of career counseling in a way that wasn't at the time O'Banion was writing this. And of course, we have to have some attitudes, that some awareness of societal changes, what's going on, to be able to kind of help people see where things might be going, to be able to talk about, in the olden sepia days when I went to college, right? Like, we logged into a Unix server to check our emails, and we stood in a big gym to pick our classes. And, like, some of us transitioned to, we could register by phone, and now everything is online. And like, what's next? What's coming next? And how does that apply to the workplace? And we have to value all fields. So I can think history is boring, but I have to value its place in our society and how it is important that we learn history, how it contributes both to our liberal arts education, and how it is a very viable profession that you can make a career out of. So then with program choice, the students are trying to choose that academic program that aligns with their goals that we've talked about for life and vocation. We have to know all the things above, but now we also need to know about the majors and minors offered at our institution, the program requirements, any special rules for transfer students, and something about the program outcomes in terms of, how much do students enjoy this, or what kinds of cool things does this lead to in terms of internships and job placement and those kinds of things. We are increasingly getting asked those questions, especially by parents, right? Is like, is my kid going to be able to get a job with this? That matters. And then when we get to the actual point of, now we're talking about courses, we have to know the program maps, or we have to be able to at least interpret them, but it helps to know them. We have to know about university policies and procedures to be able to understand and describe prerequisites. And we have to know what's available, what's out there. And there's a lot of special info we have to know. Here's where it gets really complicated. Oh, you're an international student, so you have to have at least 12 credits, and only 3 of them can be online. You're an athlete, so we need you to be full-time, and you may need to check with your athletic academic support person to make sure that you've got the right number of credits for your specific eligibility needs based on your past performance. We have to know things about repeat rules, about honors college. So it just goes on and on and on. It gets really specialized at that point. Then we get to that easy part that Sam can do while sleeping. We're going to actually make a schedule. And so we got to know how to fit that into a student's life. And if we haven't had a good dialogue building up to this point, we don't know if the student is working, is the leader of a club or a student organization, has family obligations. We might recommend a generic schedule that doesn't work for that student at all. And so we need to know things like course sequencing come in, right? If you don't take this course this semester, it's not offered again until next year. What does that mean? And then, of course, we have to know about the scheduling tools that we have available and the student's obligations. So as we look at this concept, I would be interested to hear from you all. First of all, what do you think that O'Banion meant when he wrote counseling techniques? Did he mean advising? Did he mean actual counseling? And what do you think we do a good job of here at EIU versus maybe where's a spot that we drop the ball a little bit?
I think something that we do well is being able to communicate and connect students to different offices that maybe we don't feel as comfortable speaking about, or helping them connect with different offices that will better their skills as well. So for our department, we are in constant communication with career services. And so, keeping up to date and familiar with what we offer at Eastern, I think is something that, and and working together, I think is something that we do well. Of course, there's areas that probably could improve, right? Just like anything else. But I do feel confident that if I feel that I'm not the best person for them to talk to, I would find somebody in a different department that really could help them. And so I do think that is something that is good about what we do currently.
And even that is kind of tricky to navigate, isn't it, Amanda? I mean, like, there have been times that I have known, I've been sitting in a room with a student, and I can tell that because I am not African American, in that moment, I am not reaching that student. I'm not saying I have no inability to, or I never can, but that particular student needs to see another person of color. And I have gone down the hallway and said, "Hey, Ashley, can you come in here for a moment? Because I think this person needs to see someone who represents them." But there's also steps that I can take, ways that I can learn and grow to make sure that when they're talking to me, they see that I see them, right? And so it does get really tricky, I think. Like, yes, what you said, I want to support 100%. It's nice to know that we have that kind of familial, I can reach out, I can bridge across to other units. But then also making sure that I don't pass off or dump a student and make them feel like, oh, your problem doesn't fit what I'm prepared to handle, so punt. Like, that's a tricky thing that you would be foolish to expect someone on the first day to understand that. And it takes training and experience. But yeah. What else you guys got?
I think one of the challenges that those of us who work with students, particularly who come in thinking they're headed towards a clinical profession. So Sam, jump in if you think I'm going off base. But I think one of the things is helping them understand that there may be a disconnect between their life goals or what everybody else in their life for the last 20 years has told them their life goals are, and their actual skill sets, and finding a way to convey that. It's like, I'm not saying you're an idiot. I'm not saying you're not competent. I'm saying you're telling me you're going to be a neurosurgeon, and you're also telling me you faint at the sight of blood. These things are not compatible. So how do we help you figure out, do you really want to be a neurosurgeon, or do you really want to work with people dealing with health issues that don't involve blood and body fluids? So I think we have a significant number of students, and it's not just our first gens, but they are a big part of it, that haven't had exposure to a lot of the professions that they think they're interested in. They're interested in those professions because they know there are jobs, or they have an idealized idea of, they've watched Grey's Anatomy too much, I don't know, but they have this idealized concept of what those jobs are, but they don't have anybody in their lives who have those jobs. So they don't know what the reality is. And so finding a way to gently yet firmly get them to recognize and understand that there's a disconnect between what you're saying your dream is and what you're saying your interests are and what your skill sets are. And we also, we see this with very bright students who come from backgrounds that, they have had that exposure, that sometimes there's a disconnect between their reality and what they want. Amanda and I have, and Sam too, have had a student in common who has a severe allergy that really makes a clinical profession an impossibility. Yet she has bounced from pre-nursing to pre-med to nutrition and dietetics. She's still, well, I'm going to be a clinician. It's like, and you still have this fundamental underlying medical condition that will make it impossible for you to have any of these professions if they're in a clinical setting. You know, you've got the skills, you've got the ability, you've got the academic acumen, but you've got this other thing that you don't want to face. And so I think this is where the challenges are of finding how do you help them see and accept so that you can move forward instead of continuing the wheel keeps rolling and rolling because of this disconnect between their life goals and then vocational goals and their skill sets and personal interests and beliefs. As a side note, we also see this in public health when someone has personal beliefs that really preclude their being an effective public health professional. Or it really limits the environment in which they could do that. And that's a really hard thing to navigate, that if you have very, very strong views about some particular public health issues, how are you going to be a public health professional which has an ethical code of conduct that is in opposition to your personal beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, I think to go off of what you said with that, you know, those students who have some issues with, you know, pursuing what they want to pursue, it's difficult because I think we have a group of students who've been told you can do anything you want to do and don't let anything stand in your way. You can accomplish whatever you set out to do, which is great in general. You know, we don't want to, you know, let things stand in our way that we can overcome. But at the same time, you know, there are some things that you may not realistically be able to overcome. That doesn't make you a bad person, but it does make you unrealistic if you continue pursuing something that for whatever reason, whether it's your skill set or, you know, your values or just whatever the case may be, if you continue pursuing something that's really just not going to work out for you, maybe there needs to be something that you say, okay, actually, this is something that should stop me because there's something else that's a better fit for me. And I think the challenge we all have is trying to help that student see that in some cases, being a quitter is okay. If you're quitting what's not going to work for you and going to something that will, that's actually a good thing. But you know, that part of the message hasn't been delivered to them. It's just been, you go for what you want to go for and you can do it no matter what. And sometimes that's not the reality. So yeah, it's a tough spot.
And leave it to the historian to work in the good old strategic retreat there. It really is valid. And I think it works for those of us who are honored and charged with trying to guide others in the profession. That, you know, I think back often about the advisor who came to me and told me that her goal was to be a dean of students. And I'm looking at, you know, okay, you're in year 2 of advising. You need to be working your way out of here. You need to go get some housing experience, some student accountability experience. Like if you want to be dean of students, you've got a lot of other areas that you need to get some knowledge on. And it's not about you're not a good advisor and I don't want you here, but you just told me your goal is something that you're not going to be an advisor for 10 years and then become dean of students. So we have to have some of those realistic conversations. If you're not willing to deal with blood or to put on latex gloves or to perform certain medical procedures, it makes it really hard to work in the medical field and things of that nature. We are getting close to the end of our time. I do, of course, want to again promo that we've got Dean Davenport coming in with chapter 2. And again, my reasoning for inviting her to deliver that is because when you dig into the meat, you're going to find out it's about who is our student. And I think she has an important message and some access to some information that not all of us have about who we're serving at EIU. It's also my time to remind you that, okay, we have all of these case studies. This is your chance to take the stage, to share, to grow. If presentations is something you need to work on, if critically analyzing text, please let me know. I do have 1 volunteer so far. I need 5 total, and we will let you get together and work out who's going to deliver what in terms of those case studies. But I really think we can do them all in one day. with you just summarizing what the case study is about and then talking about how it does or does not apply to a four-year institution like EIU. And even if it doesn't, what can we learn from it? What does it tell us about advising in the 21st century? So do we have any other news for the good of the order or anything before we are checking out here?
I'll just pop up in athletics land. We're going to be pushing all of our athletes to be meeting with all of you very, 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 very soon. So it's coming, and heads up. And if you don't hear from any of the athletes, please let us know, and I will light a very convincing fire under them to make them go to you as quickly as possible.
Right on. Tania, I'm calling on you. You said you had something.
Oh, I was muted. Enjoyed the presentation for today, and I like the way that you organize everything on here for us for this final slide. And yes, I wanted to also share with you all. Let me make sure I can see. Okay, I can see everybody. Oh, okay. Share with you all that like Jarek and I are expecting a little sweet treat this July. So if you see me walking around pudging out, that is why. So so happy Valentine's Day.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank
Congratulations.
you.
Congrats, that's awesome.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.
Congratulations. I hope you're feeling okay.
We did
Oh.
leave you out like Jerry, didn't we? Everybody's like, congratulations. Oh yeah, to you too.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming, for either paying attention or pretend to pay attention, for participating, sharing your experiences. I look forward to what we're going to talk about in chapter 2, and then I can't wait to see the great things you advisors are going to do when you present these case studies. So I'll be looking for your email in my inbox. All right. Have a great rest of this Valentine's Day.